Welcome back to Ohio Counseling Conversations, the official podcast of the Ohio Counseling Association, bringing you updates and conversations from around the state. This month, we have David Ross and Ashley Ackerman with the Ashland County Mental Health and Recovery Board. And I'm your host today, Kailey Bradley, licensed counselor, doctoral student, and co-owner of Refuge Counseling, LLC. Thank you so much for listening. I am going to be facilitating this conversation with two fellow Ashland, Ohio natives here. So would love to share a little bit or have them share a little bit about themselves before we kind of jump into this conversation. So with us today is David Ross and Ashley Ackerman. So if you guys don't mind sharing about your roles, what you do, that would be awesome.
Well, I'll go first. Although normally, Kailey, it's ladies first, but Ashley pointed to me, so I
I
guess I'll
saw
go first.
that. I
So
saw she pointed. Yeah.
she did. So, and again, we've had the pleasure of working with Kailey for many, many years in Ashland County in a variety of different roles. I think one of the more substantive roles has been her work in the suicide prevention, postvention, awareness raising that she's done in our community, which is so very important. We'll might touch on that in a little bit as one of our project areas that I know Ashley wanted to highlight. But my name is David Ross. I am the Executive Director of the Mental Health and Recovery Board of Ashland County. We'll talk a little bit about what boards are. I don't assume everybody knows what a mental health and recovery board are or what they do and how they function. There's 50 of them in the state of Ohio, but we work a lot of times behind the scenes, so we're not always well known. I did get both a bachelor's and master's from University of Akron, and that master's was in education, and went on and got my independent license as a clinical counselor, supervision endorsement. At this point, Kailey, that's more for show because I have given up on direct practice. I am a full-time bureaucrat working for the board as the executive director, but I had many, many years in direct service with all ages, substance use, as well as mental health concerns. Had a chance to work at a very large community behavioral health center in Mansfield, Ohio for many, many years and learned a lot there. So and then for the last 20 years have been with the Mental Health and Recovery Board in Ashland County. So it's been a nice mixture of both practical, in the trenches, working with individuals that are struggling, families, et cetera, and then working at a systems level, working with federal and state governments in terms of funding and all their priorities and the red tape, to be honest with you, as well as working with our local community, which in Ashland, as you know, Kailey, is wonderful. We have wonderful partners. I like to say that Ashland County is that kind of unicorn size. It's a perfect size where you can really bring up an initiative from an idea to actually implementing it in a very short period of time because everyone's fairly close. We get along really well. And there's just a lot of energy with our mayor and our commissioners right now. Very exciting time to be in community behavioral health in Ashland County, Ohio. But we'll get into that later. I've said enough. Ashley, I know you want to introduce. And Ashley has gone through something very, very important recently. Hopefully, she will talk to you about.
I will, yes. First, I just want to say thanks for having us on here. It's an honor to be here to talk with you all today. I work with David, also at the Mental Health and Recovery Board of Ashland County. My name is Ashley Ackerman, and I am a licensed professional counselor and just completed my PhD, just did graduation this past week. So
Yay,
that's what David was alluding to there.
congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Very
Thank you.
exciting. Very exciting. Yeah.
So my title at the board is Director of Programs, Training, and Education. And I've been working there for 2 years. And I also teach in the counseling program at the University of Cincinnati as an adjunct instructor.
Great. Well, thank you guys so much for sharing, just a little bit about yourselves. So I'm going to kind of start with a very broad question. I think for many of our listeners, they may not even be aware of what exactly a mental health and recovery board is. What are the different roles and functions of such an entity? So I would love for, one or both of you to share a little bit, kind of in broad strokes, what exactly it is that a mental health and recovery board kind of does.
Yeah. No, that's a great question, and I love answering it because I'm so passionate about what Ohio has done. The county board system in Ohio is very unique amongst the states. It's really, I think, an advantage that Ohio has over the other states. And the way it's structured, Kailey, is federal, state, and local funds, usually in the form of a property tax, a levy. Um, they flow through boards, and boards then contract with certified substance use or mental health agencies to provide the services. So in Ohio, boards can't provide services directly, but the funds go through the boards. It's really the job and the responsibility of the boards to understand the community needs, what's happening in their local community, and try to strategize with the local providers there the best way to meet those needs. And since the funds go through us, but we're not providing the services, it really allows for the board to act in that role of oversight. So we can make sure that the agencies we're contracting with are providing the services that our board expects. And in Ashland County, we are governed by an 18-member, all volunteer, all Ashland County board. And that's the way it's set up. About 2/3 of our board members are appointed by the State Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services. And then the remainder are appointed by our county commissioners. And again, I might have said that wrong. It's 1/3 mental health and addiction services and 2/3 local. So again, more local appointments than state. And that's again by design because Ohio is what they call a local control state. Our 88 counties very much feel like their voices need to be heard and their needs are unique and different. Uh, as you might imagine, Hamilton County, Franklin County, Cuyahoga County, wonderful counties, but their issues are a lot different than Ashland counties are in a lot of ways. So the boards then receive these funds, federal, state, and local, for behavioral health services. We contract with these providers. We do the oversight, we do the planning, we do the needs assessment. And another big role, and one of the things I'm excited, and I'll kick it to Ashley, is we're really responsible for community education, for training, to make sure that the folks in Ashland County are aware of the services that are available to them, regardless of their ability to pay. We'll talk about that, Kailey, but because the source of our dollars are federal, state, and local, we really can offer the services at no cost to folks. We put them on a sliding scale fee, and if based on their income and size of their family, many folks pay very little, if anything, for the services, and that's important. We are that safety net for behavioral health services. We do not contract with every possible agency in a county. No board could. We don't have that much money, so our board has to be very judicious in who they contract with. And again, that's the strength of a board, because again, it'd be different, Kailey, if I was receiving the funds directly from the Department of Mental Health and then they asked me how I was doing. I'd probably say I was doing really well with those funds, State Department. Please keep sending them to me. It's nice to have an intermediary that's local, that can track and monitor. And we meet with our agencies every month to look at how they're spending the money. What kind of outcomes are they achieving? Are they on track? Are they hitting the kind of expectations that our board has? So, but I wanted to flip it to Ashley just to talk about some of the ways that we try to promote and educate the community on behavioral health issues and where to get help. Because again, all the best services in the world don't really matter if nobody knows that they exist or how to access them.
Yeah, so David kind of mentioned one of the things that we're always doing is evaluating the needs of the community and then figuring out how we can fill those gaps, or assist in filling those gaps with our partners. So some of the events that we have in the community are the Suicide Prevention and Awareness Walk. We do that annually, and it is in September this year, September 24th. Um, we I believe this is one of the most meaningful events that we have in Ashland County. We gather to honor lost loved ones, people who have died by suicide. Their loved ones come and walk with us in honor of them. We do this to also help increase awareness about the issue of suicide in general. And we are partnering with Tim Chandler and the Silent Watch to also increase awareness of veteran suicide specifically. We stand and take a watch as part of our walk. So that's a really meaningful part of that. We also, at that event, we provide resources, educational resources, and a lot of meaningful conversations happen around the tables at that event. I know, Kailey, you've been there. At the end, everyone's sitting and talking, and a lot of good conversations come out of that. We also do a lot of trainings. So we're evaluating what are the training needs of the community, um, and then trying to provide that for the professionals. For example, we did a training in collaboration with the county jail recently on PTSD and first responders, and that was really well attended from people around the state. I think that was a really successful training. That's just one example, but we're always evaluating what we can offer and what we can do differently for the community. Also, we're out at the fairs. We're constantly trying to get information out about mental health and substance use at the fair, but also on social media, through our website. And then we're attending events all the time talking about what's happening and also where people can find resources in Ashland County.
Wonderful. So I want to give you both kind of a chance to brag on some of the work that you guys have done. And what I mean by that is I know there's some unique initiatives and characteristics of the Ashland County Mental Health and Recovery Board, surrounding trauma-informed care and just the way in which you kind of equip your, agencies that you work with to offer services. I would love for you guys, yeah, to just take a chance and brag on yourselves a little bit and maybe share a little bit of, the philosophy behind the Ashland County Mental Health Board.
Absolutely. And before I talk about the philosophy, if I will, let me brag on one of our flagship programs that we just can't talk enough about. And it's a 20+ year program funded almost entirely by our local levy. And it's what we call our school community liaison program. And again, what is so unique about this, Kailey, it's a prevention early identification program that has been in all our local school districts, like I said, for over 20 years now. And these individuals, again, not counselors, even though some of them might have degrees in counseling and licenses, but they're really not operating as counselors per se, but they're really there as a support person to the students, to the administration, to the teachers, and to the parents. And they basically, because of the funding being so flexible through our local levy, and again, always a shout out to our local Ashland County community because of their support of our local levy, couldn't do it without them. But these people keep the paperwork, the eligibility. Anybody who has a need, that need can be met almost immediately by the liaison. It can be anything from clothing, kids that maybe don't have appropriate clothing for the time of the year. It might be food insecurity. It might be housing insecurity. It might be, behavioral challenges, attendance challenges, things that are getting in the way of their academic success. But anything you could think of, Kailey, these liaisons are working alongside the students, the families, the administrative staff, as well as the teachers to support their efforts so that they can focus on education. And our liaisons can link the individuals to the services in the community. And we serve thousands of young people every year through all the different districts through this program. And again, when you talk about bragging,
Yeah.
I can't tell you enough
No,
about
I'm
how
so
much we
glad.
brag on this program. Yeah,
So glad
because
you
it's
chimed in
it's
there.
prevention, early identification. So, our board was very wise in setting this up, like I say, over 20 years ago. And I would say, and it's very hard to prove prevention outcomes, as you know. I would say we've helped so many young people avoid even going into the formal community behavioral health system uh, because they've gotten the helps and the supports that they've needed at those younger ages. We've been able to keep folks from a system that they really don't need if given the proper supports, et cetera. So that preventative kind of investment in Ashland County is seen as wise and humane.
Yeah, love that. Whenever I share about Ashland's school liaison program, often people are very jealous because it is such a wonderful asset to our community. So yeah, thank you for chiming in. And I think that kind of leads in maybe to having you both share a little bit about the philosophy of the board and in particular the very intentional trauma informed perspective.
Absolutely. And maybe I'll start, Ashley, and feel free to jump in. But what Kailey is mentioning is something that is so very important, and it really sets the Ashland County Mental Health and Recovery Board, I think, really sets us in a different place than many other boards in Ohio, in that some 15 years ago now, our 18-member board formally adopted kind of these guiding principles to uh, make all our decisions around funding services. And what I mean by this, they said, if the service in the agency that we're funding does not reflect these three core areas, we really need to think long and hard about contracting with them. And again, we'll touch on it a few more times as we go through this, but those three areas are principles of recovery, and these are well articulated at the federal level in terms of what we mean by principles of recovery. And again, patient voice and choice, the idea that recovery is possible. There's a whole series of these. The second leg, sometimes we call it, of the stool is called medication optimization. Sometimes this one is misunderstood, but what we mean by that is that we believe psychiatric medications have a role to play in the therapy process, but they really shouldn't be the primary tool in the toolbox, but they should be that adjunct tool that comes alongside and helps for a short period of time. And for most folks, the thought should be, if we use medications at all, it should be delayed until it's absolutely necessary. It should be the fewest medications needed to bring about the kind of relief we're looking for. It should be in the lowest doses, et cetera. So again, it's an optimization. It's not an anti-medication approach, but this was in reaction to what happened, unfortunately, in the 70s and 80s and into the 90s, where really the biological paradigm really took over our field, and people started seeing everything through so-called chemical imbalances and brain dysregulation, as opposed to normal human suffering and emotions, which we know are normal. And folks that go through traumatic instances or other instances should very, very much feel emotions about that, and maybe very strong emotions. And sometimes those emotions are distressing. And rather than medicating those things, we need to find better ways. And that leads into that third leg. And that's what you mentioned, Kailey. It's trauma-informed care. So the board really believes in, there's several models out there, but in essence, we really started to change from, what's wrong with you to what's happened to you. And what that means is, as we work with folks in our community, are we taking into account their life story, which is likely to include trauma? We routinely ask folks to complete the Adverse Childhood Experiences screen, that ACEs screen that is becoming, I think, more and more well known around the world, to get a sense of their trauma history. And we also ask them about resiliency, because resiliency is the flip side of ACEs, right? So we know a lot of folks that have been through a lot of trauma, but because of uh, supportive adults and other people in their life, they've been able to overcome all kinds of horrific adverse childhood experiences. So ACEs don't doom folks, but they do inform, and they should inform therapy on an individual level, and they should inform the way we as a board approach the work we do, understanding that trauma is very prevalent, but we do not want to lose sight that folks are very resilient. So we want to give them hope, again, back to the recovery paradigm, that they can get through this, and they've got strength and skills and tools that they may not remember or they need to be reminded of, or they need to grow, but they have a lot of skills and talent and strength within them that I think the trauma-informed approaches we support bring out.
I think that, just in addition to what David's saying, counselors that are probably listening to this podcast are probably familiar with these philosophies. So trauma informed care is not something that's new, but we're familiar with that more on an interpersonal level, right, as clinicians. But this is applying that to a systemic level, and I think that's what's unique about it. And I've worked in several counties, right? I see the difference that it makes to have this at a systems level and approach maybe even like policies or funding prioritization. All of that is founded in this philosophy, and it's making a really big difference in this county. So it's something to really note and pay attention of, I think.
Yeah, and give you an example of that, Kailey. And again, I'm assuming you want your podcast to be a little edgy, so I'll get a little edgy. Kailey. So because of what Ashley said and the approach, Ashland doesn't embrace involuntary outpatient treatment because by definition, treatment really can't be involuntary, right? So it goes against our principles of trauma-informed care and recovery principles if we're saying to an individual, you must do these things. You must talk about things that maybe you don't want to talk about, or else there'll be some kind of legal or consequence up to and including hospitalization. So there are certain practices that are going on in other counties, forced medication orders. These are things that we don't support, and as a result, we don't do them. And guess what, Kailey? Our state hospitalization rates are among the lowest of the 88 counties. So I don't want any of the listeners feeling like, oh, they don't do these things and they're having horrible outcomes. Quite the opposite. We don't do these things and we're having better outcomes. We respect the individual. We are supportive of their choices. And guess what, Kailey? When I think about my, particularly my 20s and 30s, I made a fair number of bad choices. I learned a lot from those bad choices. I would argue I learned far more from my bad choices than my good choices. So we don't want to be the kind of system or individual practitioner that is so overzealous. We guard individuals for allowing to make their own mistakes and learn from those mistakes. Of course, we're going to support them through those things and offer them that, but we're not going to try to protect them, quote unquote, from some of these difficult life choices that just have to be made in the course of just developing as a human.
I think it's really important, and thank you for taking the time to go through the legs of your philosophy, because I think it is really important. And so what else I kind of wanted you guys to share a little bit. You mentioned early on, kind of in the podcast, that this is an exciting time for community behavioral health. For many of our listeners, they may be early on in their counseling profession. They may be counseling students, and quite frankly, maybe a little bit fearful to go into the community behavioral space. What would you say, based on your work, contracting with some wonderful behavioral health agencies? What might you think be some advantages? Actually, let's take a resiliency perspective on that, and what do you think may actually be a benefit to early practitioners in working in those
Yeah,
spaces?
yeah, and that's a great question, Kailey. And I think depending on where folks are getting their information, um, it is true to some extent that the pay for counselors and social workers needs to be higher. I agree with that. So I know that when young people look at their return on an investment, their ROI, they're costing this out. They're undergrad, they're graduate, they're trying to think this through. Time they get their license, et cetera, the pay, everything that goes with that. And we are working on that as a field. So I understand that is for some maybe something that they're concerned with. But the flip side is, and I hope we have time to talk about this more, is the opportunities to be creative. And technology, I think, is giving us some opportunities that we never had. We often talk about some of the silver linings of the pandemic, and I know there was a lot of heartache and a lot of challenges that we all experienced. But one of the things that it forced us to do was to think a little bit differently about the role technology could play in counseling and helping others. And we've, I think, been able to come through that, understanding that technology can have an enhanced role to play, both directly in terms of counseling with somebody over a device, a tablet, etc. But also, I think we found out that the technology, and we're getting into areas that hopefully we can talk about later, where perhaps artificial intelligence and other technologies might be brought to bear as an adjunct to counseling to assist individuals. My sense, Kailey, from the younger generations, and I am fairly old, I hate to admit it, but what I'm hearing from the young people is they value privacy and they value convenience. And what I mean by that is they don't mind seeking help, but they'd rather do that in a way that maximizes privacy. So even going into an office or a community behavioral health center, for some folks is off-putting. It's not something they're interested in. And then the other thing is the convenience factor. We live in a 24/7 world, and I think the idea of being able to access help and support 24/7 in a private way is very attractive. So these younger counselors and social workers that are coming up, I'm hoping that they see this as a wonderful opportunity to get creative in how they offer their services to this up and coming, this new generation of folks that are looking for the support. And oftentimes, Kaylee, it really is more support, dare I say, coaching, than it is the classical um, intensive counseling. I think there's always going to be a role for those folks that are struggling with some of those diagnoses that are typical, things like schizophrenia, et cetera, bipolar, some of these things that folks have heard about that are considered serious. Well, those things will exist, but I think those are probably best served in an in-person, perhaps, format. But there's so many other folks that are struggling with just issues of life that don't require the level of intensity of a community behavioral health center per se. They might benefit just as well, if not better, from more of these approaches that take advantage of the technology that are maybe shorter. Maybe it's 20, 30 minutes. Maybe it's text messaging. Maybe it's a combination of text messaging, talking to the AI chat for a while, etc. So I think that's, to me, if I was a younger person coming up, I would think that would be exciting to say, how can this technology meet the emerging needs of folks that are looking for help in a different way? And how can I be creative about that?
Absolutely. Yeah. Do you have anything that you want to add, Ashley? Would love to hear your perspective too, as far as, yeah, what might, I know there's a need, right, for community behavioral health, for people to go into that space. So what do you think, yeah, it may be, appealing for younger counselors or counseling students?
Yeah, I love what David's saying about the use of technology and being able to be creative in our approaches with clinical work. I do think that that is something that's exciting and maybe a little controversial. We're not trying to like replace counselors, but how can we use technology to help us solve some of the issues that the counseling profession currently faces? So myself as a developing clinician, I am so thankful that I got to work in community behavioral health. I had some diverse experiences, met some of the coolest people along the way, whether that was my clients or the people that I worked with. Um, so I would say, the experience that you can get by working in the community is invaluable, and you can learn and grow in that space. And what is there that's more exciting than that? We're working systemically to make that better for people to enter the profession. We're trying to address some of those issues, and as we do that, I think that people have a lot to look forward to in counseling as we keep growing. So.
Yeah, I love that. What are, and this could be for either of you guys, maybe some of the things that you feel are important to advocate for to make the work environment sustainable, within behavioral health care for people entering?
Absolutely. So there is the issue we talked about with the pay. There's been an effort here in Ohio. They really have workforce development top of mind for them. There is something called the Great Minds Fellowship. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but this is an effort to provide up to $10,000 during undergraduate and graduate coursework to assist with the cost of obtaining an eligible degree or certificate. There's even up to $5,000 post graduation for recruitment and retention bonuses for obtaining employment in community behavioral health. So again, I think they're borrowing from education and other systems that have done similar things. They're even doing internship site support, 2,500 to 3,000 per intern. So again, the state is trying to assist both the individuals as well as the organizations, to develop the workforce. I think that's important. But the other things that I think, again, I don't want to stereotype, but some of the younger generation, they seem to want the challenge of being able to work creatively, and that comes with their time in the office. So I think employers need to try to be as flexible as they can with schedules. Some folks, I think, work better in the traditional office space and want to do that. But maybe not everybody wants to work first shift or second shift or third shift. Maybe some folks want to work a hybrid schedule where they're in the office some, they're out of the office some. So I think scheduling, flexible scheduling, tailored around obviously the work that needs to be done, but also maybe the strengths and preferences of the potential employees is very important. I just know that some folks are just much more creative when they can feel like they can have a chat session, they can do a video session, and let's face it, Kaylee, a lot of folks, particularly in the community behavioral health world, childcare issues, transportation issues are yeah, these are big deals. So, if it was the choice between me not having a session with somebody or us Zoom in a session, let's Zoom, right? Let's not cancel because the car broke down, or there's only one car and the wife or the husband needed it to get to work, and you know what I mean, or childcare fell through. So we just need, going back to our technology, we just need to be
Mhm.
smart and use the technology in a
Yeah.
way that makes sense.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's an accessibility issue as somebody who identifies, with physical disabilities. I know, yes, being able to Zoom with a provider, so helpful. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Ashley, did
also,
you want to, yeah, jump on in here, Ashley? I'd love to hear your thoughts too.
just like, so from the clinician's perspective, the work that we do can be very taxing, right? So it can be a high stress kind of job. You're working a lot of hours, not a lot of downtime. Maybe work life balance isn't ideal. So I think that the flexibility that is kind of emerging with technology can help address the issue of burnout in clinicians, and is hopefully making the field seem more attractive to incoming professionals. I also think that counselors and our wellness orientation versus viewing mental health as an illness, I think that that's something special that we have to offer. It's something unique and something that we can kind of sell to new professionals. Like this is how we view things, and this is what sets us apart from maybe psychologists or psychiatrists or other kinds of professionals, and just emphasizing our own professional development, our own uniqueness as a profession.
Yeah, I love that professional identity piece there. That's great. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I know, our conversation could continue for, a long time, but I want to make sure, for our listeners, what things, David and Ashley, did I miss as your interviewer here that you wanted to make sure that listeners, kind of walked away with? I know we've talked about, a wide range of topics here together, but what would you say are some important things that you really want to hit home
Sure.
for our listeners?
Yeah, and this one maybe seems a little off the wall, but hopefully folks will understand it ties in with our workforce challenges. I really believe that the state of Ohio, as well as other states, they recognize that the shortage in workforce is not just an Ohio issue. So we other states are experiencing the same workforce challenges. So I know several states are talking about interstate compacts and agreements around how the counselors and social workers that do exist might more easily be able to serve folks in other states and crossing state lines and reciprocity and how that works. So I think that's something some of us are involved with advocacy work, and I think that's an area that really makes a lot of sense right now. So the idea that, maybe, again, this is a dream, Kaylee, if I'm on a beach in Florida, I could still do a Zoom session with somebody back here in Ohio or another state. Again, to Ashley's point, that's attractive to folks, right? So, being able to live somewhere and practice somewhere else for a group of folks, I think that's really attractive. And I think these agreements between states are possible. Many times, the counselor and social worker education and licensure requirements are very similar, and that's what they're trying to figure out. I think now at that national level is how can we work together as states to so we all feel again the reason we have these standards is to protect the people that were first and foremost. We have to protect the people that are being served, and I would never say that dilute standards and risk the safety of the folks that we're serving. So there has to be a high level of professionalism and standards. But I'd like to think that we can come together on what that level is. And what that does then is it helps alleviate perhaps some of those workforce issues if we can draw from different states, et cetera. So that's an area where I don't want to lose that in this conversation because, we've got, I know the listening audience, they may know people that are involved with this work, and encourage them to keep pursuing that. It takes a little bit of time. You don't always see an immediate payoff with these kinds of advocacy efforts, but I think for our field to survive into the next 10 to 15 years, we need to get this right when it comes to working maybe outside the state of Ohio and other states being able to work within the state.
Absolutely.
I would say the only other thing I'd like to say is just I feel very, very proud of the work that Ashland County and the board is doing. And I think that it is unique, right? Other counties, I've seen it. There are things that can be learned from the years and years of experience that this board has put in adopting the philosophy of the three legs of the stool at a systemic level, and then you see the effects of that trickling down, right? And so I think that for me is an emphasis that I want to make, that it is a unique perspective, and that I think there can be a lot learned from that.
Yeah, well said. I'm very proud of Ashland, Ohio too.
Thank you.
So the question we love to ask all of our guests is, since we are Ohio Counseling Conversations, we love to ask our guests, and maybe this hopefully isn't a curveball for you guys. I don't think it will be, but what conversations do you think we should be having in our field? And some of this you've already touched on, but yeah, what do you think we need to be chatting about?
We need to talk about AI, Kaylee. I know it's emerging. I'm telling you, this conversation has just started, but with Chat GPT and the other, I have experienced several AI platforms that are specifically geared to help people that are experiencing mental health and/or substance use issues. And Kaylee, I'm just being honest with you. The few that I've worked with, they are very helpful. And I can see where they can be very helpful for certain individuals. As Ashley said earlier, I don't think it's about replacing counselors, but I think it is something that can be an adjunct, a very helpful. Maybe it's a waiting list management piece. Maybe it's something instead of the traditional homework. Perhaps one of these AI counselors, if you will, the person can chat with. I have been very impressed, and you know how this works with machine learning and AI. They're just going to get better and better at a geometric rate. So I think the more people that use them, I really see a role here in, again, not to replace, but to augment, to supplement, to work alongside. That's a conversation that makes, let's say, if you're over 40, that might make you a little bit queasy because we learned in our counseling class, Kaylee, that the relationship was the number one thing, and it is very important. So I will never say a relationship is not, but I'll tell you, when we talk about that 24/7 access and privacy, boy, AI fits that bill. Any device you're on, and if as long as the information is helpful, responsive, and the person says they're benefiting, I just see there's a role there. But I know we have to have a lot more conversations, and maybe the Counseling Association will be one of the leaders in this space. But we just need folks to be respectful and not maybe get too emotional and reactive because we've all seen Terminator, Kaylee, and everybody goes immediately to Terminator. And it doesn't necessarily have to be that bad. I think there's a role there. So that would be my thought about an important conversation. And it's coming anyhow. Okay. I think that we're seeing in other industries already. Let's not hide behind the idea that, oh, you have to have a relationship. This can, there's no role for this technology in counseling social worker. I think we have to be honest and have these conversations.
Well, I think people were really resistant at first to telehealth also, and for our profession specifically, it was like a lot of resistance to that. But I think if we've learned anything through the pandemic, it's that, some of those tools are really useful, and sometimes they're even better for our clients than in-person counseling, right? So my addition to what David said, and I fully agree with him, is just that, like, we need to talk about how we can change, how we can grow, how we can evolve as a profession so that we're serving our clients the best that we can, and we're using our tools effectively. And there are new tools emerging. So there are a lot of exciting opportunities in the future, I think, to use those tools. So
I like that. Evolving as a profession. I'm making a mental note of that for maybe a title for this episode. I think that's really, really good. Well, my friends, thank you so much, David and Ashley, for being a part of our Ohio Counseling Conversations podcast. I know we could have talked for so much longer and so many different directions we could have gone, but we just appreciate the work you do in Ashland County and for the profession at large. So thank you so much for taking this time.
No, we appreciate you having us on. We appreciate that you're doing this podcast and having these important conversations. So it's been our honor to be on.
Ohio Counseling Conversations is on a mission to make this podcast meaningful to you, and we can't do that without your help. A feedback form is linked in the show notes for this episode and is also available on the OCA Linktree. If you have any recommendations for topics or guests or any other general feedback, you can let us know by using the form. We welcome your thoughts so that we can continue to develop the podcast and grow as creators. If you are interested in joining the team or being a guest, you can also reach us by emailing ohiocounselingconversations@gmail.com. We value your insight. Thank you so much for listening.
If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to follow us so you can stay up to date with Ohio Counseling Conversations online and wherever you listen to podcasts.
This podcast is brought to you by the Ohio Counseling Association's Media, Public Relations, and Membership Committee and its podcast subcommittee. This episode was executive produced by Marisa Cargill. Research and fact-checking by Kailey Bradley. Editing by Leah Wood. Original music by Elijah Satoru Wood. Special thanks to Stacy Tesmer, Sherdine Simpson, Dohi Kimopel, Alma Moore, Amy Barcelo, and Chase Morgan-Swaney. Views, beliefs, or references mentioned in this episode do not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by the Ohio Counseling Association. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the podcast does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Views and opinions expressed by guests do not necessarily reflect the view of the Ohio Counseling Association or any of its officials. Thank you.